Personalized dictionary lists with the Common User Password Profiler. Let's begin. I attended a rodeo a few years ago, and the rodeo clown was very, very funny. One of the skits that he did was he was searching in the middle of the arena for something on the ground, and the rodeo announcer says, "What are you looking for?" And he says, "I'm looking for $1. I lost $1. I'm looking for it." And the announcer said, "Where'd you lose it?" He goes, I lost it back in the stables." And then the announcer says, so why are you looking for it out here in the arena? He goes, "The light's better." It doesn't make sense to look for something in an area where it's likely not going to be. It's a waste of time. Well, how does that apply to attacks or password cracking? If we use a dictionary list, which could be millions and millions of different possible passwords and passphrases and combinations, it's going to take a long time to go through that entire list. Our objective in this nugget is to find a way that we can narrow down the field of what that password is likely to be. Well, Keith, how do we do that? A couple basic things. Number one, we do some research and we find out some details about the person. For example, if we know the person is maybe this guy, we know his name, we know his wife's name, maybe a kid's name, maybe their nicknames, maybe their birthdays, maybe their dog's name. We know what their hobbies are. Maybe he likes fishing, maybe he likes bowling, and we put all that into a password list generator, and then we can go ahead and create maybe a 50 or 60,000 password list using all possible combinations and extra characters, including substitutions. A lot of times people substitute for an E, they'll use a 3. And instead of using a T, they'll use a 7. So there's some common substitutions. People take passphrases and then they substitute characters. They use words that they're familiar with for their passwords. So if we can whittle down a password list to maybe 50,000 or 60,000 combinations, which is still a lot to go through one by one and try to verify and validate those passwords, it's going to be a lot quicker than if we're comparing it against several million. One of the tools that we can use for this is called the Common User Password Profiler, or CUP for short. Now, it's interesting to me that this has been in Backtrack for a long time, and the latest and greatest, this is April of 2013, the latest and greatest version of Kali, which is version 1.0, it doesn't currently have CUP in it. So you might have to install it if you're running Kali, or if you're running a previous version of Backtrack, it has CUP already in it. So we're going to run CUP, and it's going to basically ask us, okay, what's this guy's name? What's his wife's name? What's his kid's names? What's his birthdays? What company does he work for? What are his hobbies? We'll put all of that in, and it can generate a more likely possibility of passwords that we could use to crack his account. This tool right here, Medusa, is another example of a password cracker that can use a dictionary list, like the one we're going to generate with CUP. So whether you want to use Medusa or you want to use Hydra or some other password cracking tool that uses a dictionary list, the dictionary list can be fed into any tool that can leverage one. So I am on Backtrack. This is 5 release 3 that I'm currently running. It's the latest and greatest version of Backtrack before it converted over to Kali. And so let's go ahead and move to the folder where CUP exists. It's under Pentest Passwords in the CUP folder. Let's take a look together at what's in this folder called CUP. We have cup.cfg, we have cup.py, which is the actual code we're going to run, and we also have a docs folder. The content of the cup.cfg is just a configuration file that CUP is going to use. Let's go ahead and open it. We'll do a more of cup.cfg just to take a look at it. And it's got some options here that we can go ahead and tweak. Here are some of the substitutions that it will add to the password list. For example, I mentioned earlier that an E sometimes gets swapped out for a 3 or vice versa. We have Z for 2. We have the T for 7. And if you want to modify that, you certainly can. It's simply a configuration file. So if we want additional swap outs for various characters, we can put them right here. It'll make our password list slightly longer, but again, we can tweak it to our liking. We can specify what special characters we want to use. We can specify years. So there's nothing special about these 3 years. You can put in any years that you want to, but it's going to use those as variables as it builds the password list. If we go down a little bit further, it's going to go ahead and for numbers, it's going to use from 0 to 100. If you want to go from 0 to 1,000, you certainly can. That'll simply make the password list longer. But this is the tool we would use to configure the options for the password generation done by CUP. Hitting Q returns us to the prompt. So to launch this, we're going to say from the directory that we're currently in, which is the The program name is cup.py, and the -I is for interactive mode. So it can ask us the questions and we can respond to it. So it'll finally build that password list for us. Now, if we needed help with this, how would we get it? And there's very likely help as well if we type in /cup.py space -H for help, or just the command itself, press enter without any options. It's very likely in either case to go ahead and give us all the possible options for it. As I mentioned, the -I is for interactive mode. It's going to interview us, if you will, and ask us some questions about our subject. We'll put the answers in, and all of that information will go in as variables as it creates the password list for us. So let's go ahead and continue the interview. Let's say the person that we're going to build this password, the person whose password we're trying to crack, his name is Steve Burns. So it says, okay, what's his name? What's his surname? What's his nickname? What's his birthday? We supply all that information. What's his wife's name? What's his wife's nickname? If she has one, we can press enter for any variables that we aren't sure of. It'll simply continue. The children come next, the birth date, the nicknames, the pet, we'll say the pet spot, the company name, any additional keywords we know about that person, like he likes running and fishing and bowling and whatever. We can add all that as well. And then it can say, okay, do you want to add some additional variables? I'm going to say yes to everything. And it's just built us a 49,744 word list that we can now use with any tool that uses a dictionary as part of its attack. So let's take a look at the contents of this folder. You'll notice there's a brand new file right here, and it is steve.txt. And if we look at that file, it's going to have 49,744 words in it that we can use with a dictionary type of an attack. And to see the contents of that file, we're going to do a more space steve.txt. We could also do a cat and take a look at that file as well. And here's what I would like to do. Let's take a password that's fairly easy and near the top of the list. Because if we use a password that's like 40,000 into the list, it's going to take a long time to go ahead and try to crack and get to that password. So let's use the one that's fairly high up in the list. We'll use 004041. So let's go to a router and we'll set up a brand new user called Steve, and we'll specify this as his password. Again, just for the essence of not having to wait for it to go through every single one till it finds a match, that'll make the actual solution to what his password is that much faster. Now the question you might ask is, well, Keith, if we're already logged on in privileged mode on the router, we really don't need to crack his password, Steve's password. And that's true. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. So we'll create a user account called Steve. Say username. We'll say it's Steve. We'll say he's at privilege level 15 on the Cisco IOS router. And let's say his secret is going to be 004041, just because it's fairly high in the list. And we'll press enter. Good enough. So we're set. I also want to do a quick check just to make sure some services are running. We'll do a show, control plane, host, open ports. And here are the current ports that are open on this router. And the reason I do this is just to verify that the services are going to be functioning. That's SSH is open, Telnet's open, port 80 is open, port 443 SSL is open. Looks like we have some DHCP as well. Looks like TFTP is sitting there, and that is an SNMP as well. So fantastic. We can use then an attack tool like Medusa that can attack most of these ports, most of these protocols, and then simply tell it to use that dictionary list that we just created, steve.txt, as it tries each and every password with the protocol we specify. So let's go back to our backtrack system. I'm going to hit Q to go ahead and return to the command prompt, and let's launch Medusa. Now, for, again, any of these commands in Linux, if we need help with a command, we can simply type in the command with a -H, and very likely that's going to give us the syntax and the options for this tool. So let me put in this command and I'll walk you through the actual switches for Medusa that we're using. So we're telling it that we want to attack the host at 10.0.0.1, which is R1, that's our default gateway. The username we want to try to use is Steve. The actual password file is that steve.txt file that we created with cup. The -E right here is this puppy, and somebody says, okay, additional password checks. Do you want to check for no password, or do you want to check for a password that's the same as the username? And so by simply saying -E NS, it's going to try a blank password. It's also going to attempt to see whether or not the password is Steve, if that's the user account we're trying to log in as, and we are. The -F right here says that we want to go ahead and stop once you have success. Don't keep going through the dictionary. There's no need to. And the -M in uppercase is specifying the module. So the module we're going to use is SSH. There's a boatload of other protocols we could use besides just SSH. For example, if Telnet was open, we could use that. We could use HTTP and many others that are supported by Medusa. So let's go ahead and launch this. So it's basically using that dictionary list that we created with CUP, and that same dictionary list we could use with other applications like John the Ripper, Hydra, and other tools that are used for password cracking. Now, because it was so high up in the list, we don't have to wait very long for this to complete. So it went through here's no password. It tried the password of Steve, and then it started in the dictionary list, and it found it right here. And it says, "Papa, you're done. The password is 004041. So if we wanted to log in with SSH or attempt to do that, we'd very likely be able to with this username of Steve and the password of 004041. Now that the hacker knows exactly what this password is, how could we prevent this from happening? And the answer is we might want to set up some controls on R1, the router that we just compromised, to say, you know what, if there's so many failed login attempts, which is all of what these are, within a certain period of time, let's have a block period. So if there's 4 login attempts allowed, and then it blocks for 5 minutes, and then allows 4 more, and then blocks for 5 minutes, you know how long it would take to get through the entire list? Forever. That would just be way too long to be reasonable. Another option that's a really good one to protect a network device is to only allow logins for, like, example, SSH from specific source IP addresses. That way, even if an attacker does gain the username and password that works on that device, unless he's sourcing that traffic from a specific IP address or subnet, the actual SSH session won't be accepted. An even better option would be to not use single-factor authentication. For example, knowing what the username and password is, but requiring multi-factor. Maybe having an RSA token or something else in combination with the username and password. And multi-factor authentication is a more secure method for controlling access into a system. So if we wanted to try a login, it would be pretty easy. Just type in SSH-L. Again, for help with SSH, just type in SSH-H for all the help. So I want to log in as Steve, and the host IP address is 10.0.0.1. That's the router, and we'll press enter. It says, okay, here's the fingerprint. Do you want to accept it? Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to say yes. And now that I've accepted that, it's now asking me for the password for Steve, which I believe was, actually it's right here. It's 004041. So I'll type that in, press enter, and I'm in. So now if I do a show SSH, I've got SSH session active, and if I do a who, it says, hey, congratulations, you're logged in as Steve. And a show privilege indicates that I'm at privilege level 15. I am King Kong. In this video, we've taken a look at how we might improve our accuracy with a dictionary attack by building a custom dictionary list, a word list, based on the person or entity that we're running the attack against. We also demonstrated Medusa, which is yet another password attacking tool that leverages a dictionary list. I have had a lot of fun. Please remember, only use these tools on networks that you are explicitly authorized to do so. Keep yourself out of trouble. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing. Accessing the SAM database and cracking passwords. In Kali and Backtrack, we have several options for trying to reverse engineer what the hash means inside of the SAM database. In this video, I'd like to walk you through some techniques of getting that hash and then some methods for cracking it. Let's begin. Our objective in this video is really simple. I'd like you to imagine that you and I have been hired by some company that wants us to come in and see how good their security is. We say, great, we'd love to do it. What are the rules? What are the ground rules? And they give us a list of a few things they don't allow. For example, please don't install rootkits on our computers that might be there after you leave. Nothing like that. But they give us some parameters, and then we said, great, we're going to start. Now, that authorization is sometimes jokingly called a get out of jail free card, because the physical security people, the people at the front desk and so forth, they may not be aware that the senior executives have authorized a penetration test, and so hopefully they're going to be on the lookout for anything that looks abnormal. So what's one method we could gain access? Well, we could certainly impersonate somebody else. We could impersonate somebody doing insecticides, or somebody doing elevator inspection, or somebody doing computer repair, what have you. Or maybe we hang out with a group of people who are on a smoke break or something else, and we sneak back into the building along with that group of people as they come back in. So in short, we plan on gaining access. Now, that access doesn't have to be physical. If we did social engineering and we had somebody click on a link, we could get logical access to a computer as it builds a covert channel. And we took a look at methods for doing that in both the Metasploit and the Armitage videos in this series. Once we've gotten physical access, we then want to find a good candidate for a server or a workstation or a PC on the network that we could go ahead and compromise. And one really easy way of doing that is with a live CD. Now, in this series, we've taken a look at using live CD. I've used it a couple times based on the scenario where you put the CD in and it boots up to that operating system. Well, how's that going to come in handy if we're compromising another computer? Well, here's the reality. If we find that computer and we have our live CD, either Backtrack or Kali, whatever your favorite flavor is, and we boot off of it, we're now running Kali Linux or Backtrack, depending on the flavor, and that is in control of the computer. We can then tell Kali or Backtrack, hey, I'd like to go ahead and mount the existing file system and then access the file system on that PC through the operating system of Backtrack or Kali. And in many cases, that is so easy to do. We'll demonstrate that here in a moment. So once we've mounted the file system, we have access to it, we then find the hash. So instead of keeping passwords in plain text, we're going to keep them in a hash format. A hash is a one-way process. You can't reverse engineer it backwards. So here's what we do. We dump the hash. So let's say there's 40 different user accounts. And we have the administrator and Bob and Sally and Lois, et cetera, et cetera. After each of those accounts will be the hash. Now that hash all by itself isn't too valuable to us. However, once we dump that hash, we take a copy of it, we then go offline and we use a password cracking tool such as John the Ripper. So a tool that would actually dump the actual hashes would be like SamDump2, part of Backtrack and Kali. And we also have John the Ripper, one of many tools that we can use to go ahead and try to crack that password. And here's effectively how it works. We have this hash. Let's take the hash for administrator. So we have the hash for administrator, and we say, I wonder if it's the password is 1234 bang A, B, C. And what we do is we take this passphrase and we create a hash, and then we compare that hash against the hash that we dumped against that account. If it matches, bingo, we have the password. If it doesn't match, we then go on to the second and third and fourth. So if we have a dictionary list that has, for example, 10 million phrases, we can have John the Ripper go through a specific dictionary, one password at a time, creating the hash, comparing the hash. That's a tedious, long process. It can also randomize. So it can go ahead and use alphanumeric special characters and just try all different possible combinations. So it can actually mix up a dictionary attack against a list as well as a brute force attack, which is where you don't have a specific dictionary, but you're simply going through the various possibilities of characters, searching for a string that creates the hash that matches the one that is in that hash you dumped from the computer. Now, let me share something with you. This process is going to take a long time, especially if they have a pretty tough password. Another option that we can use to speed up the process is something called a rainbow table. Now, what the heck is a rainbow table? A rainbow table is a dictionary, if you will, of hashes. So what if we took 10 million passphrases, passwords that we want to check against, and then before we ever try to use them, go ahead and create the hashes? So we could spend 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it is generating that many hashes. And then when we go to compare, it's hash to hash, much quicker on the actual comparison of what the hashes that we dumped to the hashes that we already pre-generated, so the computer doesn't have to do it real time. So in short, a rainbow table is going to dramatically increase the efficiency of comparing hashes to the hashes that you dumped. So here's what you and I get to do. I've got this Windows 2008 virtual machine. Now, this is a little embarrassing. About 3 months ago, I was working on an IPv6 video series, and I used this as a IPv6 server in some capacity in that series. So I set up a password for it when I installed it, and I honestly cannot remember what that password was. So I can't even log into this Windows 2008 machine anymore. So we're going to pretend that it's our victim. What we would do is we'd simply take our CD, our live CD, put it in the CD player, and then boot the machine to that live CD. Now, if the BIOS says don't check the CD first, go ahead and just boot to the hard drive, we could simply modify the BIOS on that computer. If somebody has locked down the BIOS, which, by the way, is a good security measure, then we couldn't actually pull off this attack because the system would never boot from the CD. But in most cases, the BIOS is not locked down, and in most cases, putting in a CD and powering up the system will give us the option of booting to that live CD. So here's what we're going to do. In VirtualBox, which I'm using, we're going to tell this virtual machine that it should have a live CD inside of its virtual CD player, and we're going to boot off of it. So let's lay out the playing field here for a moment. I'm using VirtualBox from Oracle as my hypervisor for emulating the hardware that this Windows 2000 server thinks it's running on. And I'm going to go to right-click and go to Settings. I could also simply highlight this and go to Settings up here. It really doesn't matter. And under Settings, under Storage, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, dear Mr. Computer, in your empty DVD reader, I want to go ahead and I want to put something there. So I'm going to highlight that. And then I'm going to use this search option here under CD/DVD, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it I want it to mount the Backtrack Release 3 KDE-32 ISO image. And that's simply the Backtrack version 5 Release 3 that I've been using in previous videos in this Nugget series. So let's go ahead and select that. And now, when it boots up, it's going to see that it has this, and it's going to go ahead and boot from that live CD, or at least present us the option for doing so. So we can emulate, if we will, physically putting in the live CD, powering on the computer, and then watching the behavior. So let's click OK on that, and let's go ahead and start that virtual machine. Okay, so right here it's saying, okay, I booted to the CD. What do you want me to do? I'm going to press Enter. Once we pressed Enter, this is just like running the live CD off of any other computer. I want to go ahead and default boot text mode and press Enter, and it's simply booting up. And now it's just booting up Backtrack and running it off of that live CD. Now the reality is we're borrowing the hardware, in this case the emulated hardware, of the 2008 server. So let me go ahead and bring this up so we can all see it. And it's saying, okay, great, we're logged in. There's not even a password required on the live CD for Backtrack 5 Release 3. So now that we're here, let's go ahead and bring up our graphical user interface with StartX. And let me adjust this just a little bit. And now we've got Backtrack running. Now the benefit, or the goal I should say, of doing this is that with the live CD booted on the potential victim's computer, we can then go ahead and mount the file system, meaning make it available to us. And then we can dump the actual hashes from the SAM database, and then we can take that copy, that dump file, take it offline, and then throw our John the Ripper or other password cracker against the hashes in that dump. Now, what I would like to do, so I can get a bigger font to demonstrate this, because it's the live CD, SSH on Backtrack version 5 Release 3, that is not enabled by default. SSH is not enabled by default. So let me go ahead and generate the RSA key pairs again with SSHD generate. And now with that enabled, we need to start the SSH service. We'll say start SSH. And the only purpose for this, for you and I, is so that we can have a bigger font that we can both see together. If we were in the office and we were doing this to a live computer, we'd definitely do it right there from the console. You wouldn't need a bigger font. You could just do all of it right there at the command line without even bringing up the graphical user interface. So here's where we are in the process. We booted the live CD on the computer where the SAM database exists, where we want the hashes. So let's go ahead and take a look and ask Backtrack, in this case, tell me about the file systems that you see. And it says this. Oh, I see dash dev SDA1 and dev SDA2. This one's not very big. This one's huge. And it happens to be that this one right here is the actual file system where the SAM database is kept. So here's what we'll do. On Backtrack, and this also applies to Kali, we'll make a folder. You can name it whatever you want. And then we can simply mount this file system right here as that folder. So once we change directories to this new folder, it then basically represents the entire file system. And that gives us the ability to navigate and work through the existing file system on that host computer. Now, just to make sure, I think I'm in the root subdirectory on this computer because I booted from the Backtrack CD. Let's just do a quick PWD to check. Sure enough, we're in root. And we're going to make a temporary folder, and I'm going to call it temp folder. You could call it Bubba or something else. We're just creating a temporary folder as a reference point, and then we can mount the existing file system on the host computer to that same directory. The syntax on this computer, because it's /dev/SDA2, to mount that, we'd simply say mount, and then put in the actual partition you want to mount, and then specify the name of that folder that we just created as our mount point. So in essence, anytime we go to this folder right here, temp folder, we're really sitting at the root of this partition on the host computer's physical hard drive. So let's change over to that folder. We'll use a cd command to get there. So cd to root temp folder. And let's just do an ls just to see the contents of this. Now what we're looking at right here, which is the really fun part, this is the file system sitting on this partition right here of the host computer. Now, with a little assistance from your favorite search engine like Google or whatever you happen to use, I happen to do it on a Windows 2008 system. I want to go to the Windows System32 config folder. So let's just go ahead and do a change directory to that folder and do an ls. And so just as a reminder, this is the actual folder that we're in. So this is our mount point, and this is the Windows System32 config, and this is the contents of that folder. Now, to actually extract the hash into a format that we can go ahead and try to break it, there's a two-step process. Number one, we're going to use a tool called bkhive, and we're going to reference system and then specify that we want the output to be this file called key.txt. The bkhive command says I want to take the contents of system and I want to make a file called key.txt, and I'm putting that in the root folder. So if I type in cd on this live cd that I'm in, it'll take me back to root, and there should be a file called key.txt. Then I'm referencing that file called key.txt. I'm using samdump2, and I'm saying go ahead and create this file called root hashfile.txt, also in that same folder. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have two files. This one is just an intermediate file, but the actual hash for administrator and anybody else who is on that Windows 2008 box is in this hashfile.txt. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this hashfile.txt file with us and go offline somewhere, and then let John the Ripper or some other attack tool using a dictionary attack or a brute force attack with all possible combinations as we try to identify what is the actual password those hashes represent. And again, using a rainbow table can expedite that process if we have a rainbow table already generated with all the possible hashes. So just for grins, let's take a look at that hashfile.txt. We'll use the more command for that. More, look in the folder root at the file hashfile.txt, and here it is. And wow, so because I set this up, I set up the administrator, and I didn't set up any additional explicit user account. So I've got administrator, and I've got the hash for the administrator. So now what to do with it? Of course, we're going to take this offline because it's going to take an incredibly long period of time to crack this hash. So we take the file back to our office or back to our location, and then we spend the hours and days and weeks, etc., trying to crack that. Now, to do that, we could use several tools. One of the very popular and very powerful tools is called John the Ripper, sometimes referred to as JTR or sometimes just as John. On the backtrack CD, here's the location for John the Ripper. It's under pen test, under passwords, and the actual folder named John. So that's why I've changed there right now. If you need to reference that or look that up, that's exactly where it is on the backtrack distribution. If we want to see the contents, we can use the ls command and take a look at the details of what's in there. And just to highlight a few, we have some configuration files that we can tweak. It's got a password list, but the reality is if we wanted to configure this john.conf file and manipulate it, we could go in and we could specify any dictionary list that we wanted to. We could specify the variables that we want to do as part of a brute force attack. So it's a fairly huge configuration file, but it's very customizable based on exactly what you're looking for. In an earlier nugget on Common User Password Profiler, we identified how we could create a custom dictionary. So you could actually tell John the Ripper to use that custom dictionary instead of this one right here, which it will use by default, only because the configuration file specifies that this password list should be used by default. So let's go ahead and use John the Ripper. Now, if we needed help with John the Ripper, how could we get it? Well, Keith, we could probably do a John space -H for help, or just type in John by itself, or there's probably man pages for it. All of the above. Excellent, excellent work. So let's go ahead and run it from the command line. Fairly simple execution. The /John right here is simply specifying that I want to go ahead and run this from the current folder that I'm currently sitting in. So that's what this guy is about right here. I specify the hashfile.txt that has our hash of the administrator right here. is in that file. And I also said format NT2. Now, that's because it's on a Windows 2008 machine. If I was on another system that had a LAN manager hash, I could use it without this parameter. And the reason I knew to use this was because the first time I ran it, it gave me a warning saying, hey, I detect NT type of hashes. You might want to consider using the NT or NT2 option along with John the Ripper. And I also said, I only want to search for administrator. So if we had 40 or 50 users in this hash, one line for each, if we just wanted to try to crack one username, this is how you identify that one username out of the group. So right now the screen is paused only because I was writing on top of it. So I'm going to release the pen. And now as we're looking at this, we're going to say, well, Keith, it doesn't look like it's doing a whole lot. If you want to see status reports for John the Ripper, you simply have to press enter like I just did. And it will show you what it's currently working on as it goes through its attempts to verify what the password is that's associated, in this case, with administrator. And trust me, it's got a long way to go. I don't recall using a simple password on that Windows 2008 server. So this could take, depending on how complex that password was, this could take days or even weeks to go ahead and crack. And again, using a rainbow table in combination with this, where you have 10 million hashes already calculated, that would speed up the process quite a bit. But either way, it's going to take some time. In this video, we've identified how we can boot a live CD on a victim machine, dump the hash, and then analyze it offline to try to figure out what the actual password is for the associated user account. It's also important to note that we don't have to have physical access to the device to get the same information. There's tools inside of Metasploit. We had our Metasploit and Armitage videos. It's also possible to dump the hash through a Meterpreter shell as well to get that same content to go ahead and crack with tools like John the Ripper. Now, for those of you that want to practice with this in an authorized manner on systems where you have the authorization to do so, I have all the commands that we used in this video in a file ready for you in the Nugget Lab download area. I have had a great time. I appreciate you joining me. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing. Describe and use a rainbow table. A rainbow table is going to help us be faster at breaking passwords. In this nugget, we're going to be reminded of that fact and a demonstration of it in use. Let's begin. I'd like you to imagine that you and I have successfully dumped the hash from a Windows system and we're offline and we're trying to figure out what the password is. Maybe we're using John the Ripper or some other tool, but here's the negative side of using either brute force or a dictionary type of attack to find the password. It's going to take a long time. As I alluded to in the John the Ripper video, we could leverage a password cracking tool that uses a rainbow table, and that would make it much faster. Now, here's the whole concept behind a rainbow table. If we have a hash, and we have a password cracking tool over here, that password cracking tool, if the traditional methods, using either brute force or going through a dictionary, takes password number 1, generates a hash, then compares it. Nope, didn't match. Takes phrase number 2, generates a hash, then compares it. That generation in real time, trying to figure out what the hash is and then comparing it, the generation of that hash takes a long time. What if we have a table that has all these hashes already computed? And then we can just compare the hashes in this table against the hash that we have that we dumped, and it would be a lot faster because the computer doesn't have to generate a new hash for every single passphrase that we want to check. That's the benefit of a rainbow table. Now, there's a couple ways of generating a rainbow table. We could do it manually. There's a whole suite of tools called RT. There's RT Gen, and there's RT Sort, and there's a RT Crack that can be used to create and use rainbow tables. There's also another tool called Offcrack, and what I like about Offcrack is that we don't have to spend the days or weeks or more generating the rainbow tables. We can actually download rainbow tables for that tool. So on the internet, there's all these rainbow tables that exist. We can simply download them, leverage them as we try to figure out what individuals' passwords are. So here's what we're going to do in this nugget. Take a look at the advantage of a rainbow table. That's one word. It's faster. That's the major advantage. We can create or download the tables. In this nugget, we're going to download some tables that can be used specifically with Offcrack. And then what we get to do is we're going to go ahead and use some tools that we've already seen. We're going to use Armitage to remotely compromise a system. So we don't have to be right there with the live CD. We don't have to be physically on premise. We can use Meterpreter to dump the hash. That's one of the functions that Meterpreter gives us. And then once we have the hash, we can use Offcrack and a downloaded rainbow table along with it to do a much faster job of cracking that password. Let the party begin. This is a VirtualBox host. It's a Windows XP machine. I'm going to go ahead and do start and go to a command prompt. And let's just do an IP config just to verify what its IP address is. So it thinks its IP address is 10.0.0.6. That's great. I just want to make sure this machine is still functional. Let me try to ping the default gateway at 10.0.0.1. And that looks great. I just want to make sure it was a functional machine that was operating. And now let's bring up a backtrack system. So let me go ahead and arrange these just a little bit over here. I'll put the XP a little bit over here on the left with backtrack over here on the right. So how exactly do we have the backtrack machine learn about this host at 10.0.0.6? Well, there's several ways of doing it. We could use Nmap, we could use Armitage, we could use MSF. Another tool that's really handy if you just want to look for Microsoft machines is NBTScan. And I'm going to say NBTScan for NetBIOScan for 10.0.0.0/24. That's going to scan the entire network just looking for NetBIOS devices, Windows devices. So as the responses come back, check this out. And it says I've got Keith Nugget. That's my Windows 7 host machine. I've got XPPC, which is at 10.0.0.6. And that's the target that we want to focus on. So let's go ahead and bring up Armitage. And we'll go ahead and we'll compromise that specific host. Probably the quickest way to bring up Armitage, we could either type in Armitage, that would do it, like that, or we could find it in the menu system and that would work as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say connect. It's going to graciously start the services I need for this to work. I'll click yes again. So now that Armitage is running, let's go ahead under hosts and say I want to go ahead, let's do a quick Nmap scan just to put them on the radar. So we'll do a quick scan with OS detection, and we'll say 10.0.0.6 and have it go out there. And that'll definitely find our little Windows XP box sitting at 10.0.0.6. Now, while this is doing its work, we could also simply go physically to this device if we had physical access, boot off of the boot CD, the live CD, and simply do a dump of the hashes that we need for offline analysis. So it says scan complete. I'm going to say OK. There's our device. And I'm going to go under attacks and say find attacks, and it's going to find all the attacks that it thinks might be applicable to that operating system. It says, okay, there's a new attack menu, great. So we'll right click here, go to attack, and we could just do the Hail Mary attack and throw everything at it. However, I think that because we know that on XP, this attack right here works extremely well. We've used it before. Let's go ahead and launch that again. So it says, are these the right addresses? I'm going to say the local host is 10.0.0.7. Is that my address? It should be. Let's bring up a command prompt real quick and do an ifconfig. And sure enough, I'm at 10.0.0.7 right there. Fantastic. I'll close that. And let's click on launch. So it's going to go out and launch this attack against that device. And if it's successful, this guy should turn red, he'll have lightning bolts, and indeed he is compromised. Fantastic. So down here, if we want to see the details of that, we can say, now it could be the length of the header or the type of the protocol, or it could be the flags if it's TCP, and then we could sort by it as well. And it's so easy to do. For example, let's go ahead and let's just grab a random packet. Wow, look at this. The packets don't lie. And this, my friend, is not healthy, whatever this is. This is an ARP request from the same device, and he is asking about 12, 13, 14, 16. This doesn't look healthy to me. This guy right here, why would he need to know all the layer 2 addresses of all those devices at the same time? It doesn't look healthy, so we can investigate that a little bit further. So let's go down to another. Wow, it just keeps on going. So let's go down to, let me jump down to some normal traffic. Here we go. So here's some fairly normal traffic right here. Let's say we're looking at this, and we're looking at the TCP header information, and we're looking at the flags. So let's say we want to add the flag information as a separate column so we can sort by it. So I can just right click on flags, and right here, apply as column, poof. It's now a new column right there. So if I wanted to sort by this, for example, I can now click on this column and it would sort by the flags. And that's just another really easy way to bring to the surface the detail that you want to look at. So instead of having to open up every single packet that's TCP, I can now sort by this and take a look at the actual details without having to dig down into each one. It's also really easy to get rid of that. I can right click on the columns and say displayed columns, and then go back here and say, you know what, I don't want the flag. So I just deselect that, and that column will now go away. Another really great feature is right here under the statistics menu. If we click on that and go to summary, it gives us a beautiful summary of the file that we're looking at, the length, the timestamps for the first and last packet. So we had 2 minutes and 24 seconds for this entire capture that we're currently looking at. If we scroll down a little bit further, it also shows us right here that we have captured 9,304 and we're displaying 9,304. Now that might seem normal. How is that going to be helpful? Well, it becomes really helpful if we start setting up filters. For example, let's say we don't want to look at all the traffic, but we want to look at traffic that's just destined to, for example, 192.168.1.42, every packet. To make a filter, we could up here type out a filter, or to make it easier, right click and say I want to apply as filter, and I want to have that selected. So I selected the destination IP address, right-clicked, apply as filter, click on selected, and that creates this filter for me right here. Now, all it's showing is anything that has the destination IP address of 192.168.1.42. Now, check this out. This also is very helpful. If we go back here to statistics and summary, check it out. Now it's saying, okay, you've got in your capture file, you have 9,304 packets, but you're currently displaying only 384, and that's because you've got this display filter set to destination IP address of 192.168.1.42. Now, to remove that filter, which is just a display filter, all our data is there, it's just only showing us certain parts of it, we can go to here and click on clear, and that removes the filter, and now everything is visible in this screen. Again, another really cool tool is under statistics. Under protocol hierarchy, check this out. I wonder how much traffic of this type I saw, and I wonder how much traffic of that type I saw. So the actual menu item is under statistics and protocol hierarchy. That's where we're actually looking at right now. And this is so sweet because it'll show you, okay, it was 100% Ethernet. Yeah, that's layer 2 information. As far as IP version 4, it was 96.43%. And then TCP was 86%. And then SSL was 1%, etc., etc., etc. And if we scroll down a little bit, because I think I have IPv6 on here as well. There we go. So there's IP version 6 information right here. Very small quantity that I captured inside of that capture. And then on top of the IPv6, we had some UDP, some HTTP, some DNS that were all within that umbrella. Another really cool option under statistics is the conversations. If you want to see who was talking to who, simply click on conversations, and it's going to populate this table. And right here it shows you all the various protocols. So this is all Ethernet, and this is all IPv4, IPv6, TCP traffic, and UDP traffic. And if we want to zero in on any one of those, you simply click on the tab, and it'll give us the details for that. So for example, we had 20 packets between this address and this multicast IPv6 address. If we wanted to see that inside of Wireshark and have it filter, check this out. You right click, say I want to apply as a filter selected, and if I just want traffic between those two addresses, I go to A to B, address A and address B. It'll apply that for a filter. Let me show you where that filter is showing up. If I close this, check it out. Here's my filter right there. So we were able to use the statistics and conversation to actually identify flows of traffic and then set up a filter, and that filter ends up right here to govern what we're going to display in this output inside of Wireshark, which is pretty cool. And if these are a little mushed together because they're IPv6, we can go ahead and expand that a little bit to give a little bit better readability. Again, to clear this filter, if we no longer want it to filter what's being shown to us, we can go ahead and click on clear here. And back under statistics, we have another option called endpoints. So we're interested, hey, who are my top talkers? Who's sending the actual most traffic on my network? For IP version 4, as an example, simply click on that tab and then say, I want to go and take a look at the number of received bytes. So you can sort it. So that would make this device right here, 192.168.1.39, my top talker. I could right click on him, say, you know what, I want to apply him as a filter. And if we go back to our Wireshark, let me minimize that for a moment. Now this is saying, okay, if that IP address shows up, that's going to be my filter to control what's shown here. And this is my top talking device, traffic to or from that IP address of 192.168.1.39. And of course, we could right click on one of these conversations. In this case, it's TCP. And we can say, I want to go ahead and follow that TCP stream, and it will show us the details for it. So in this case, what we just captured was a conversation of him going out to Cisco.com. Here's some response he got back from the server. And if we scroll down a little bit further, we have additional content for that conversation. Now, with that filter in place, it's only going to show us that specific TCP stream. We could get rid of it by hitting clear. But let me share with you another powerful feature inside of these statistics. If we go down to the packet lengths and launch this, it's going to say, okay, you want to see packet lengths? By default, it's going to use whatever filter you currently had. So we had that filter, it carried it down here. If we click on create, it'll go ahead and create a table including this filter. So it's only going to apply packet length information based on traffic that matches this filter. If we didn't want that, we could simply cancel this, clear the expression, aka the filter, and then go back to statistics, go to packet lengths. This time there's no filter applied. We want to go ahead and click on create and check this out. It's going to show us for everything that was captured the packet lengths. So we have a large chunk of packets right here. 45% are in that range and 38% are in this range. And then we have some others across the board, but that's our major packet length. So if we had a network where we were trying to optimize it or verify something, so this is a really handy tool to give us information on packet lengths for the traffic that we've captured. Another very, very fun tool that's very helpful is the I/O graph. If we go up to statistics and I/O graph, when it comes up, it says, okay, here's all your traffic. And so you might think, well, okay, here I have the actual quantity of traffic. Here's my time frame going from left to right. How do I actually make sense of this? It just shows me the data. Well, we can use these filters right here. So the filters, just as before, we could say, I want to see all traffic from a specific or to a specific destination address. For example, let's go ahead and minimize this over here. Let me drop this down just a little bit. Let's say we're interested in 39. He's a big talker. So let's say we want to just isolate him on a graph. So we could say, I want to take this address. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say copy. And then right here it says as a filter. So all I did, it put it in my clipboard, if you will, that I can go ahead and paste in. And we can go ahead and say, I want filter number 2. I'm going to right click and paste. And let me make this a little bigger so we can all see. So it says IP source is 192.168.139. If I want to see any traffic that had that in the address, I can say IPADDR like that, and then go ahead and click that to have it show up. Now, right now it's putting in red his traffic versus the traffic from everybody else. If I want to remove the graph of all the traffic, I simply can remove it. And it's because 1.39 was virtually all the traffic for this capture. That's why it's almost mirroring it. But if we wanted to look at other traffic, for example, let's say we want to look at just HTTP traffic and have that be in green and click on the button. There our HTTP traffic shows up. Now, because the scale is like this, if we removed graph 2, then it would change the scale. So if I'm going to click that back on, look at the top right over here. If I add or remove that other item, it's going to change the scale. That's why it looks like it's bigger. But what this is showing us in green is just HTTP traffic from anybody to anybody else. We can do the same thing for ICMP and click on graph saying we want to see it, remove everything else, and it will scale it for us. So there's very likely a very small ping that some individual or party did during the time that this was captured. And to remove any of these filters, you can just highlight and remove the content and you're good to go. You can also modify the style. If you don't want a line, you can go ahead and say I want impulse, or I want to go ahead and use F-bar, or I want to go ahead and use dots to represent it. Whatever your heart fancies, you can do as you put this graph together. If you want to save the graph, which is not a bad idea if you're trying to document some process or troubleshooting or something else, you simply click on save, and you go ahead and save it as a file, and then you can go back and look at that graph later at some point in time without having to recreate the graph. If we want to take a look from our capture and see what type of HTTP requests were being made, under statistics, there's a whole bunch of HTTP options. So under statistics, down here under HTTP, we have a packet counter, request, load distribution. So for example, we click on request, it's going to build a table saying, okay, do you want to apply a filter, Keith? I'm going to say, no, I want to see the HTTP request for all the packets, not just a certain subset of them. So I'm going to say, go ahead and create. And as it builds that for us, it's going to show us all of the HTTP requests that were made. And if I maximize this a little bit so we can see it, I can see where all the sites we're going to. So we'd request that out to Juniper and Cisco and Palo Alto and a whole bunch of others here that were probably background requests that went out based on analytics software running inside the computer and the browser. And if we wanted a closer view at the details, we could go ahead and open those up, and it would give us more details on those requests. Another really fun one that I like is the flow graph, also under statistics. If we go down here to flow graph and open it up, it's going to say, okay, do you want to see all packets or just displayed packets? Because they don't have any filters in place. Those are going to be the same at the moment. Do I want to see general flows or just TCP based? And I'm going to click OK and check this out. I'm going to maximize this too so we have full real estate here. And so what this is showing me is my conversations of what's happening. So here I have some HTTP activity between these two ports with this address. I've also got, it says configure route 32768. That's some spanning tree information. Fantastic right there. If we want to scroll to the right a little bit. So here I have those ARP requests that we saw earlier. I have that one machine that was going wacky asking for, 1.1 and all the other devices. So here's the detailed information on those. So if I scroll down a little bit here, we can see the additional content for those requests. Holy shnikers, look at that. So that's definitely a problem that we want to look into. So in the comments over here, it says, okay, it's this guy who's been asking. He's asking all these people about their layer 2 address and a whole bunches of people. So what we could do is use some of our other tools. So let's bring up, for example, how about NBT scan? And let's see who is 192.168.1.27. What exactly is your NetBIOS name? Okay, great. So there's his layer 2 address. There's his NetBIOS name. And so I could go find that computer on the network. And I would first find out what software is running, because it's very likely something malicious, or maybe it's some gaming software that's trying to keep contact with those other devices, but it's not normal. It's not normal for a device to repeatedly ask for layer 2 information for a whole range of devices on the same local network unless there's something malicious afoot, which, honest to goodness, that is not my machine. It happens to be another member of my family, which I will investigate and resolve. Another option that we have in the world of Wireshark is a command line equivalent, and that is T-Shark. Let's say, for example, we don't want to bring up a GUI interface, or maybe we can't. Maybe we're doing an SSH session, and we don't have the redirect back to an X Windows server, and we simply don't have the option for a GUI. We can also use something called T-Shark. So if we need help for T-Shark, there's two ways of getting it. We can do a man, T-Shark, and that's the man pages for it, which is great. I'm going to hit Q to quit. And we can also type in T-Shark -H for help, and that will give us the command line switches that we can use in combination with T-Shark. As a basic example of how it works, if we type in T-Shark and press enter, this is basically going to display to the screen any of the content that's seen by the network interface Ethernet 0. So, boy, let me pause that for a moment. I have all those ARPs again. So that's that same layer 2 MAC address, and he's still asking about all these devices, and it's happening over and over. Right after I finish this nugget, I'm walking over there and I'm finding out what's going on with that computer. So this is just another way of seeing the same information. Can we save files? Can we look through files, etc. using T-Shark? The answer is absolutely yes, and the entire documentation for it are in the man pages. In this video, we've taken a look at Wireshark and the command line equivalent T-Shark, which is included on the distributions of Backtrack and Kali. I would strongly encourage you to start practicing with this amazing protocol analysis tool. Why? Because if you start practicing now, either with your own traffic that you're capturing or you've downloaded some sample files, any knowledge that you learn about how protocols should normally work and their baselines and how they interoperate together, you can translate that directly into a production environment should the need arise. So I would strongly encourage you to practice, practice, practice. I've had a great time. I appreciate you joining me. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.